Okay, good morning to everybody. To start off with this morning, we'll do attendance. Anne, are you here? You're here, okay. Ron, are you here? Okay, Ron's here, good. Okay, Jewel, you here? Okay, very good. Mike? All right, good. Elizabeth? All right, good. All right. Elliot? Yeah, okay, so I'm not. That's good. All right. No. All right. Well, Frank is here now, so that we're getting ready to go. So I appreciate everybody being willing to come in this morning and continue our study in the book of Daniel. And let's open up in a word of prayer, and then we'll do a little review and then dive right in. Father, thank you very much for this morning and for the privilege we have to be the body of Christ here on this earth. Thank you for the examples that we have in the scriptures of people like Daniel. Thank you for people that we have in this body of Christ that are examples of how to live for you. And thank you for our godly leadership of Wayne and Steve and the things that you are doing in the midst of us. And I pray that you would continue to use this church to impact the community, continue to use this church to impact our lives individually and to grow in our relationship with you. So we just pray this all in your holy name. Amen. All right. Daniel chapter 6, probably the most familiar Bible story that there is. Minus maybe Jonah and the whale, that whole thing. That's pretty popular too. But Daniel and the lion's den is kind of like everybody really heard. Even if they're not followers of Christ, they probably have heard that story before. But I want to just look back very quickly to start with to the book, or chapter 5, just to kind of get us rolling and think about it. So in chapter 5, we learned about a guy by the name of a king named Belshazzar, and he had 1,000 lords, and what experience did they have? Belshazzar and his guys. What did they experience? Handwriting on the wall. Very good. So they have this experience of this supernatural hand coming down and writing on the wall. What was the explanation that Daniel gave of that handwriting? What was the explanation? Yep. So his pride, his arrogance. What else? You're done with. You've been weighed in the balance, and you've been found wanting, and your kingdom is going to be divided and handed off to the Medes and the Persians. So and I like the fact, Derek, that you brought out the reason behind it, the arrogance that, and it was almost in your face, God, because he particularly chose the vessels from the temple in Jerusalem to pull out and deface, if you want to call it that, and then to give glory to their own gods for what would truly be what God had done, and was in complete control. And they found out what was the outcome of this whole thing? What happened? What happened as the outcome of the handwriting on the wall, Daniel's interpretation, and that night? Yeah, the king died, and a new dude, what was his name? Darius. Right, Darius comes in, and how old was he? 62 years old. So just slightly older than me. So it's a cool story, and it's interesting to see that God used this whole thing, and he's continuing to be sovereign. And as we scroll forward with Belshazzar, what kind of a person, what was the outcome for Daniel? I might ask that too. What was the outcome for Daniel at the end of that?
He became
third highest person in the kingdom, right? And he got promoted, he got a gold chain, and all of this happened. Good stuff. What kind of a person was Belshazzar? Just to help us remember, what kind of a person was he? Yeah, he was definitely not a follower of God. He was nasty. He was, what word did you use? Narcissistic. Yes. Yes. Again, another person who was concerned about only themselves. And so we see this whole thing happen, and now we have a new leader. Yes.
He should have learned. He saw what happened to his dad as king.
Yep.
What he went through, and you would think that he would have realized that I can't do these things.
Yeah. His grandfather had gone through, and actually, I believe that he really had a conversion of heart, but that didn't carry over. And Belshazzar just did not follow along with it. And we're going to see, as a new kingdom comes into play here, kind of a difference in the way government was run and how things were decided and everything else. And it's kind of an interesting transition. Anybody remember back to would have been the first dream that Nebuchadnezzar had? And there were some materials that showed up in a statue. And what was the first material? Gold, and that was equivalent to the Babylonian rule. And the next color was? And it was silver, and it was all a part to describe the next kingdom to come into play. 2 arms, Medes and Persians, makes total sense, and it went on from there. So we're seeing that Daniel actually got to experience firsthand the transition, the first piece of that dream that he encountered when he interpreted it for Nebuchadnezzar. All right, so just a couple of footnotes here, and then we're going to dive right into the passage. So Darius, if you went back and you looked at the Babylonian literature, you're going to see 3 Dariuses show up, and the interesting thing about it is this one isn't one of those 3, probably. Looking from secular literature at the scriptures. What happens is that Darius, the word Darius, actually means holder of the scepter. So it's more of a description of the title rather than the individual. And looking at it later on, things showed up and said that the guy Gubaru, who was a Mede, took over and was the head of that Babylonian time frame. And they called him Darius because he was the holder of the scepter. Okay, so the critics of Daniel, back before a lot of these ancient documents from Babylonian times were discovered, would say, oh, well, Daniel's full of it because there's no King Darius that matched up with this time frame. But in reality, it was Gubaru, and he was the king. So when I ask you the follow-up test on here, and I put in there, what was King Darius's name, you are going to go, oh, I know that one, that's Gubaru. Little tidbit, I don't know what spiritual significance that has, other than it really reinforces the fact that people have been criticizing the book of Daniel as being not authentic and accurate, when in fact it continues over and over as more archaeological things are found, becomes more and more accurate in what was described. It's just that it didn't follow the expectation of the time when people were first looking at it. All right, any questions before we dive into chapter 6?
I'm not smart enough to think of any.
That I doubt. That I doubt, Ron. You probably have a couple that you're holding back just to embarrass me a little bit later on, but that'll come with chapter 7 through 12. Chapter 6. Okay, I'm going to start reading, and we're going to do 3 verses, and we're going to turn around and ask some questions. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps, or governors kind of idea, to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So, what's a little bit unexpected here? What's a little bit unexpected here? Well, he planned to. He hadn't set him up over everything yet. But what's a little bit unexpected? Yeah. Yeah, so even with the transition from one king and one nation ruling to a new nation ruling, not just a change in father-son kingship changeover, but we're talking a whole different culture took over, but yet they kept Daniel and made him one of the key guys in this whole thing. As a matter of fact, they were going to make him the number 2 ruler of the kingdom of Babylon. That just surprises the heck out of me. I would not have thought that Daniel would have been a part of that mix. Why do you think he was a part of that mix?
His history from behind went with him. And, by this time, the whole country had to know who he was.
Okay.
And where he stood. So, it was, and another thing is, like in verse 2, he set these up and all these people under him. It says, at the end of it, and the king should have no damage. In other words, nothing that went on, he had plenty of ways to pass the buck.
Yeah, that's right. So you brought out 3 really good points, Dick. I think there were 3 there, and I want to make sure that I reiterate it. So, first of all, Daniel probably was known for his exceptional qualities coming in. The second thing is that the king wanted to set up a hierarchy to prevent himself or the kingdom from losing money or having turmoil or problems in it. So you've got this whole scenario where if I was going to take over another country, and I really do plan to take over Roseau County, but that's all right. We'll talk about that later. No. But if I were going to do that, would I come in and replace the entire government with new people that didn't know what they were doing? Probably not. If I could convince somebody who had the experience and the relationships and knew what the phone number was and what the email address was, if I could leverage those people and they had them on board with where I was going, that probably would be a good thing. And then it would make my transition a little bit smoother and not expose this. So you're thinking we have 120 different little regions or townships, if you want to think about, with inside of this kingdom. You got a satrap or a governor or administrator or a person over each one of those. It makes a lot of sense to take people who knew what they were doing and sanction them to do it for you now, instead of taking an entirely new person. Again, they're taking over Babylon. When you think about World War II, when they came in, and France, Vichy France is a good example. Did they, or even the whole country of France, did they replace and kill off all of the mayors of all the towns? No, they kept all of that superstructure in place because they didn't have the people or the knowledge or speak the language to be able to do it.
Dan, here, all of us here believe there should be time limits on our government officials.
Okay?
So here's a good example of it. He got rid of all the stuff, all the partners and the buddies and everything else that were all in the other kingdom. He got rid of them and brought in new people that would probably still closer to the people and closer to each other.
It could be. They could have re-architected and brought in entirely new people. Mm-hmm. But I would think it makes more common sense for them to use the people that are there that are willing to serve in the new administration.
Yeah, for a while anyhow.
You bet. You bet, until you can get it converted over. But it's interesting that Daniel, at such a high level, continued to serve in that capacity. And I think verse 3 tells us a lot about it. So what in verse 3 screams at you that says, don't replace this guy?
Excellent spirit.
Yeah, excellent spirit within him. We're going to see, as we read through this chapter, Daniel demonstrated and actually had a really good rapport with King Darius. And you probably know that already, and you're thinking about the whole story in the back of your mind, but there are a lot of reasons why that happened.
So under this, the only reason that he was chosen, that because he was, not because of his knowledge, but because of who he trusted.
And thank you for bringing out the obvious. I love that. She said it wasn't because of who he was or his capabilities, but who he trusted. And really, in all reality, it was all part of God's plan. Very first lesson I asked you, why was Daniel brought to captivity? It's for times like this, for situations like this. Do you think he would have preferred to stay in Jerusalem and the Israelite or nation stay intact and everything? Absolutely. I wouldn't want somebody else to come in and take over and carry me captive to Canada. I mean, that just would be terrible. But the point is, it was all part of God's plan, sovereign plan, and Daniel was an integral part of it. And we're seeing it over and over and over again.
So when we see God's plan, we need to walk in it.
You got to walk in it. You're absolutely right.
We can't think we aren't going to walk in it and still get this
It's true. It is true, Ann.
to ourselves right today.
We got to walk in his plan to receive his blessing. So let's continue on and see how Daniel walked in his plan. Chapter 6, verse 4. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Wow. What did Daniel's success generate in the other leaders? What did Daniel's success generate in the other leaders? Jealousy. Envy, yeah. You know, it's kind of funny, but you're right, Alice. They kind of respected him because they tried to find something at fault. Why do you think they didn't want him to be numero duo? Dos, right? Dos? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, if it had been me in that situation, he couldn't have found a better person probably in the whole country than Daniel to take the lead, because people would follow Daniel without a second thought. And you know, the more people you get into a crowd, the more they just come along.
Interesting thought.
Where you think it, he brought by far the majority probably of the people, we don't know how many, but he brought toward it because of the fact that he's smart enough to put Daniel in that place.
So he was smart enough, and because he put Daniel in that place, but he was looking at it for the sake that he had somebody who could trust, right? He had somebody that was not corrupt, somebody who was going to look out for his best interests. And I will give credit to Darius to this one point. His one point was he was looking out for himself to make sure that he didn't have any loss, right? Any damage. So he was looking out for himself, so he pointed the best person he thought for the job, or he was going to. But why do you think the other presidents and satraps and all of those people did not want him to be in charge?
Daniel made him look bad.
Daniel made him look bad?
I was going to kind of expound upon the same thing. His character convicted them.
You bet. His character convicted them, made them look bad, made them feel... Do you think that they were all pure and doing the best thing and uncorrupted? No, definitely not.
There are those who, I'm going to say, are on the left, can't stand the truth. And Daniel had the truth.
So Daniel had the truth. Now, Dick, you made a comment that you thought everybody would be really glad to have Daniel in charge because they knew them. And I would actually, I appreciate your perspective on it. I think it would be just the opposite because he was an exile. He was a captive from Judah. He came in, he wasn't Babylonian at all, even though he'd been there for 60 years. He was not this bloodstock that everybody would go for. He was actually a foreigner.
But we will clean up to Jesus' time, and we had the Pharisees, they could find no wrong with him, and so they bucked him,
Yeah.
Still, look at the crowd that followed.
Well, the crowds followed him, but the crowds are also in the crowd that asked him to be crucified, right?
But, look at the people that actually followed him.
Yep.
And human race hasn't changed at all over the years.
No, we are still evil people and very self-seeking and not willing to let somebody else be lifted up instead of us.
Yeah, something we don't know though is how many of those others that trapped were born.
You know, we have no idea knowing what the makeup was. All we know is, and we're going to get to this in the next little bit, is that these guys that were trying to avoid having Daniel be the number one president or the administrator over all of them, they lied. They said, all of the satraps and all of the administrators, everybody's all on board with this little message we're going to give you, King Darius. And, that mischaracterization was really, really devious, was really blatantly a lie. Was Daniel on board with this? Absolutely not. Were there other people that would not be on board with this? Absolutely not. So as we dive into this a little bit further, we're going to see how naive I think Darius was. He got duped, and he wasn't a very happy camper about that. But
Isn't that the world we're in now?
well, isn't that the world we're in now? You know, I definitely agree with that this world has been duped in many ways. I think that the truth is going to win out, though, isn't it? Ultimately, the truth is going to win out. And that's what chapter 7 through 12 is going to reveal. So, what do you think was at the core of Daniel's success?
His faith.
Pardon?
His faith.
His faith. His faith was definitely at the core of his success. His trust in God. Absolutely. Yep. And we're going to find out one more element that is a part of those that really, really contributed to this. And it's going to become very challenging to all of us. So, let's continue on. Verse 5. So, finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." You know what? I hope that the people that work at Marvin Windows would say that about me. I would really want them to say, yeah, we're not going to find anything wrong. Now, I am not naive enough to think that that is even remotely true and that I make mistakes all the time at work. And I think probably a few of the rest of you, just some maybe, also make mistakes at work occasionally. But the point is, yes.
You know, the thing about it is, Daniel, even when his law was passed, he kept doing the things.
Yeah. Yep. Daniel didn't allow this ruling to sway what his behaviors were. And you're absolutely right. That's part of who he was, isn't it? Yep. That's a really good point.
Do you think that worrying is not trusting?
Do I think that worrying is not trusting? What do you think, Ann?
Well, we know that worrying is sin.
So then, so if you know that worrying is sin, then worrying is not trusting, is it?
So we apply that to ourselves. So sometimes there's little things that we want to worry about.
Yeah, we do want to worry about those little things, and it's a lack of faith.
And this Daniel, he went to his windows and prayed openly, and wherever he was, he let it be seen clearly where he was walking.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And we're going to get to those passages in just a second. As always, Ann, you are like 3 steps ahead of where I'm at on my reading here, but you're spot on. He was definitely demonstrating a faithfulness that he wasn't afraid to, he wasn't going to hide it. He wasn't going to shy away from it. He wasn't going to compromise. And that's where the challenge really comes for us, too, in our faith. All right. Let's continue on. So verse 5, one thought I had here. Isn't it interesting that the thing that made Daniel successful actually appeared to be his weakness to the others? Huh? It always is that way.
Somebody that's successful, you've always got jealous people behind them that don't like to see that.
Yep. But they analyze his entire life. Daniel, here's Daniel. Okay, well, he in this area, his relationships, no, he's good. Oh, he doesn't compromise. He doesn't. No, he's not corrupt. Oh, here's where he's weak. He's a follower of God. He trusts in God. I mean, it just seems so insightful.
He's not seeking a high place.
No, he's not in it for his own glory.
He accepts it when it's given to him.
Yeah. So, Matthew chapter 5, verse 10 and 12. And I don't like to jump around too much because I want to stay on track here. But there's a verse here that in the Beatitudes that really fits this scenario very well. So Matthew chapter 5, and I'm just going to read verses 10 through 12 real quickly here. Okay. And he said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." And, you know, he falls right in, smack in the middle of this blessing from God. And we're going to see that that proves out true in the life of Daniel as the consequences and the whole thing falls together. So, verses 6 through 9 of chapter 6. So the administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed, that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decrees that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. So interesting note here. They lied. But what was it that was even more conceited here? What was the thing that actually made this happen? What did King Darius do?
That would be great if no one would ask anything of anyone else but him. He'd really win.
Yeah, power. He'd get really powerful. Nobody would go to anybody else other than to him. He would be numero uno.
That could be, but then also it could be that, hey, get these pests out of the way.
Get them out of my face, you guys. Whatever you want, this will decree it. Maybe it could be.
So he would be the silver.
He is the silver. His kingdom, the kingdom, the Medes and the Persians would be silver. That would also include Cyrus a little later on. But actually, Cyrus is the ultimate king during this time period. Guburu, or Darius, was just in Babylon as the king of that area.
But he put all these people under him, so he, to begin with, did not have to deal with this stuff.
Well, right. He didn't want to have to deal with this stuff.
And so I can see him just come in, well, you go ahead, take it.
It's very possible. it's clear that he didn't think about the unintended consequences, right, of this command. He wasn't thinking about Daniel. He wasn't thinking of, think about all of the other areas under his influence. All the Jews, all these other religions that were underneath, all these other worshipers, they had a multi-God experience here. They had lots and lots and lots of different gods that they would go to. And yet he agreed to this. I think he was just totally like spur of the moment, like you said, made this decree and had no thought to the consequences. So I ask you, what do you do when you are asked to sign something or agree to something? How deeply do you think about that commitment you're making, and do you think about the unintended consequences? Read it before you sign it. Well, that's a good point. I mean, how many of you have ever had, okay, I refinanced my house, a few years ago or whatever. Did I read every page of that? There is no stinking way I read all of that. Now, am I a fool? Yeah, I am. But I had to trust in somebody else to do a little bit of research for me. And they're the ones who put that document together and everything else. But now you get to this situation. He's king. He's got to be thinking about that, right? And
Signed that because if I sign it, I'll get rid of these guys. They won't bother me anymore.
Maybe that's what was going on in his head. And we don't know. We're not told anything other than later on he really regrets having signed this. He really regrets agreeing to this.
On at a totally different level. In all honesty, we can't look at that, what he signed, and really say how we sign it, or how we look at it. Because of the fact that he was just so far above everybody, that when he come in, sure, his signature, how much of that stuff goes across our White House desk today that it just
Well, that's
blindsided, gets signed, blindsided.
that is true. That is true.
Well, what's really goofy is the law of the Medes and Persians.
No repealing any laws?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's really goofy.
Yep. Well, do you think these satraps and these administrators were counting on that? They repeated it like 3 times in the passage. Oh, you can't repeal this after you sign this. You know that. I mean, they definitely were banking on this to help them correct the situation. What I find really amazing to me is that they were stupid enough to think that after this happened, that they would continue to be in the king's graces. Think of Darius is thinking, okay, I'm going to set Daniel up. I'm going to be set. Everybody's going to be well managed. Everything's going to be cool. And then that guy gets falsely accused. He ends up being caught in his own signing of this document. And then they kill Daniel. And now how is he going to think about those presidents and satraps and everybody else who deceived him into signing that decree? There's no way. I just can't. I have a hard time believing their logic was sound at all.
Dan, those people had their gods, like we have ours. And,
Well, we only have one God, right?
like we have our God, yeah.
Yeah.
But, well, each one of them, they come from, you said there were 100 different gods. People were believing in all kinds of different religions and stuff in there. So they had their religion that they were fighting against, fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel was definitely not somebody that they wanted going against their religion. If they could figure out a way to get rid of them,
Yep, that's right. So they were definitely looking for a way to replace him and not have him involved here. So we're going to, the next little part is actually the core of what I want us to focus on today. So now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he'd done before. Then these men, well, let's stop right there. So what did Daniel do?
Kept on doing what he'd been doing all along.
Yeah, he didn't change his course. This is who I am. This is who my God is. I'm going to continue on my course. Do you think he knew he was going to get in trouble? Yeah. I think he knew that this was not going to pan out very well.
It says when Daniel knew that the writing was done.
Yeah, he knew it wasn't. You know, I find it also interesting. There's some patterns here that I want to pull out. So, do you think Daniel was successful, but he disobeyed all the rules of the Babylonians, the Medes, and Persians? Do you think he was successful because he disobeyed the rules?
Access to obey the government.
You bet, and he did. As a matter of fact, Jeremiah the prophet said, hey, pray for this country, get involved, plant gardens. He was encouraging them to be a part of what was going on there. Why? Because God's plan was going to be fulfilled. They shouldn't be disruptive or anything else like this. But you know what? It came to a certain point, and then Daniel said, no more. I am not compromising here. This is not part of my administrative duties. This is not part of the laws of this government that I'm going to follow. Now, for each of us, we may have been tempted to toy with this whole perspective as we deal with COVID land and everything else. And we have this point here. Daniel says, I'm going to keep on doing what I am. Now, did he go to King Darius and say, hey, save me? No. He just continued to do what he was going to do. He was being faithful. Now, I am not saying even remotely that we need to be civilly disobedient, but there is a point in time where we will have to be.
Daniel didn't go out in the middle of the street to show them, hey, I can still go to my God. He stayed in his room where he had done day after day after day.
Yeah. Yep. He didn't necessarily go into the temple and worship in Jerusalem, right? We see him, or in Babylon, he did it in his own room, but he did open the windows to the east. He was doing exactly what he was doing before.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised, since it was brought up here like this, that when Daniel went to his room and prayed, he was praying for those people that set that up against him too.
Very possible. Very possible. He was praying for help. It does say that.
When he found out that, he went home, went to his room, and opened the window and prayed.
Yep.
And so I would be very surprised he wasn't praying for the people that...
He definitely could have, but he was definitely praying about the situation. But you know what he was mostly doing? What was the key word about his prayer?
Petition and supplication.
Well, but his thankfulness. You can look at it right here. Now, petition and supplication is all a part of it, but thankfulness. He was thanking God. Huh? What? See, sometimes we get so embroiled in our circumstances, in our scenarios, that we forget to thank God for everything that we have. Remember, God is sovereign. He's in control of the whole situation. He's going to work it out. And Daniel, and it might be worked out by Daniel getting to be dinner for a bunch of lions. Right? It could have been. It could have been. He didn't keep Daniel from getting thrown in the lion's den, because he had a plan behind that as well. We just need to stop that clock, okay? So, he opened the window, not trying to hide it. And he did. How easy would it have been to say, okay, I'm just going to stop this for 30 days. 30 days. I mean, that's just not a lifetime. That's just a little while. I mean, that must have been a temptation, right? Avoid the whole problem, the whole scenario. But yet, he didn't change his behavior. He didn't change his habit because the pressure was on, because he was going to get in trouble for following his faith. And he did it 3 times a day. Faithful, a pattern, a habit, just as he had always been doing. He got down on his knees, humbling himself before God. These are all really, that is so old school. You know, you think about that, getting down on your knees. I don't want you to show me your hands. And I'm old. I'm 60 years old. I was down on my hands and knees yesterday putting windows in over at Pastor Wayne's with a bunch of faithful guys. But you know what? I was down on my hands and knees, but do I do that all the time when I pray? I don't want to see your hands, but I don't do it all the time. But maybe I should. A pattern of what it looks like to be righteous and godly. And I believe that his prayer life is what enabled him to do what he did. I think he had trust and faith in God, but it was exhibited and bore out in his prayer life. He gave thanks, remembering he was an exile, a prisoner, and he was about to be killed, and he gave thanks. Was this a one-time deal? No. This was a pattern of life. So, let's continue on. I'm going to see how well I can do here in 3 minutes. 11 through 14. So, these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish the decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or man except for you, O king, would be thrown in the lion's den? Yes. The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who was one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. So, I want you to think for a moment. Nebuchadnezzar had the statue built, and they wanted everybody to praise and worship, bow down and worship when the music played. And Daniel's 3 friends refused to do this. Now, they refused to do this, and they were brought before Nebuchadnezzar. And you see the parallel kind of happening here, where they were being accused for not caving in and worshiping or doing what the government says. But what happened to the reaction of Nebuchadnezzar in that situation towards those 3 friends? How did he react? No. Before that. No, he didn't. I mean, he did eventually. But what happened when those 3 friends were accused and brought before him? He said, okay, I'm going to play the music. You guys bow down. And how did they react? What did they say? The 3 friends. Yeah, Frank's going, no, I ain't going to do it. No matter how many times you play that stupid music, I am not going to bow down. And Nebuchadnezzar, he was like, no big deal, right?
He boiled over.
Yeah, he boiled over. You know, if he had a toupee, it would have gone flying off. I mean, he got so mad, he had the furnace heated 10 times hotter, the whole deal. But look at Darius. How did Darius respond when Daniel didn't obey him and his command, his decree? Yeah, it's a whole different scenario. You see the relationship that Darius and Daniel had. And as we study next week, we're going to see how that relationship boiled over into how Darius viewed Daniel's God. And that's one of the learnings, one of the key learnings to our whole understanding of this passage is how is our faithfulness impacting other people? How is our faithfulness impacting other people? Sometimes we think, Daniel was so faithful and everything else, but I want to look at the result of his prayer life. I want to look at the result of his standing up and not compromising. And how did that impact others? That's why God's left us on this planet, to make an impact. And so as we close this morning, I want to challenge you with those thoughts. How are your knees? I want to challenge you, are you living your life in such a way that you lead others to honor and glorify God? Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you very much for this morning and for the lesson out of Daniel chapter 6. A challenge to us. How is our life modeled after following you? and living a righteous life. And we know if we live a righteous life that we will be persecuted, we will be falsely accused as part of Satan's design, but it's also part of your design. And God, I pray that you would embolden us, encourage us, and guide us in our walk with you. In Jesus' name, amen.